Oh, welcome back. You're listening to Across the Border. This is a live prophecy reality edition. Okay, in this segment, I'm going to jump into the prophecy issue here, the historic roots of the millenary belief. And this is the last section I added to the book. And as I said, now it's just for the rest of this month until September. I'm going to go through it, read it all myself again, and do the audible file, which will invoke my final edit, and then publish it in September sometime. So thought I'd share this with you here. The historic roots of the millenary belief. We start out, all of the early Christian fathers were millenarians. And the word millenarian is kind of an odd word. People don't use that today. It's what they call a pre-millennial today. Your pre-millennialism was just called millenarians then, or chiliasts from the Greek. So all of the early Christian fathers were chiliasts or millenarians. And the Roman Church calls it the millenarian heresy. Makes you wonder about all those people who don't believe in it. Okay, and they expected the advent at the termination of 6,000 years from the creation. Imagine that. So I'm one of those. I'm in agreement with those, because they expected the 7th millennium to begin, of course, after the 6th millennium ended. Yeah, that seems quite logical to me. Only they had their timing off. There were notes in the Septuagint that led them to believe, that they were about in the middle of the 6th millennium from the creation. Okay, so they expected the advent at the termination of 6,000 years from the creation, which, according to the Septuagint, would terminate about AD 500 to AD 550. That was wrong. We all know that now. I've got my study. What year is it? And we go through the Bible. If you haven't seen that, go to my website, and it's right there at the top. You can click on the what year is it there and read the whole article for yourself, every detail of how the Bible gets us to the year that we are in. And actually, we are actually near the end of the 6th millennium now. And we are about 30 years from the end of it now. Yeah. That's the determination I came to. And encircling this epoch, he continues, was the first great period of expectation and disappointment for the church. You can imagine. They expected about 500 AD, the sixth millennium to end, and the 7th millennium to begin. So it was a great expectation and a great disappointment, which led to some great errors, I believe. So, respecting the second advent, or Christ's return. There were in the Septuagint notes which led many to believe that in the first century they were in the midst of the 6th millennium from the creation, much like the notes later inserted into a very popular 19th century Bible, leading many into the 7-year pre-tribulation secret rapture era. You ever hear of that, any of you guys? Kind of the same thing happened. Someone put notes in the Bible, and they were wrong, but people believed them. Okay? It's funny how history rhymes. The lesson should be well learned. The conjectured notes of men should always be suspect and not be used to interpret the Bible. The ancient Jews had a tradition that the world would last for the period just named, 6,000 years, and the learned Gregory of Oxford gives their argument, namely, because God was 6 days about the creation, and 1,000 years with him are as but one day, and he refers to Psalm 90, verse 4. Therefore, after 6 days, that is, after 6,000 years duration of the world, there shall be a 7th day, or millenary Sabbath of rest. Manasseh An ancient Jewish rabbi thus expressed his belief. As for my opinion, I think that after 6,000 years the world shall be destroyed upon one certain day or in 1 hour, and the arches of heaven shall make a stand as immovable, that there will be no more generation or corruption, and all things by the resurrection shall be renovated and return to a better condition. Manasseh also assures us that, quote, this, out of doubt, is the opinion of the most learned Aben Ezra, who looked for it in the new earth of Isaiah 65:17. Bishop Russell, professor of ecclesiastical history in the Scottish Episcopal Church, says, in his Discourse on the Millennium, the opinion of the Jews on this head may be gathered from the statement of one of their rabbis, who said, the world endures 6,000 years, and in the 1,000 or millennium that follows, the enemies of God would be destroyed. It was in like manner a tradition of the house of Elias, a holy man who lived about 200 years before Christ, that the world was to endure 6,000 years, and that the righteous, whom God should raise up, would not be turned again to dust. The learned Joseph Mead, called the illustrious Mead, says that the Kabbalists called the 7th millennium the great day of judgment, because then they think God will judge the souls of all men. And he quotes many of their rabbis to show that they defined the day of judgment a millennium, or 1,000 years, and connected it with the resurrection and Messiah's kingdom. For example, David Kimchi on Isaiah 55:5 says, the observance of the Sabbath is essential to the faith. For such only as observe the Sabbath confess that the earth will be renewed, because he who created it out of nothing will renew it, as if he who observes the holy Sabbath testifies his faith in the great Sabbath in which God will renew the world. This ancient opinion was not confined to the Jews. Bishop Russell states that Theopompus, who flourished 340 years before Christ, relates that the Persian Magi taught that this present state of things would continue 6,000 years, after which Hades or death would be destroyed and men would live happy, etc. This early tradition was found also in the Sibylline oracles and in the Hesiod, in the writings of Darius Hystaspes, the old king of the Medes, derived probably from the Magi, and in Hermes Trismegistus among the Egyptians, and that from Dr. Hales. Okay? This opinion, however well formed, enabled the unbelieving Jews to argue, as Ephraim Cyrus says they did, that the time for the appearing of the Messiah had not come, failing as they did to distinguish between his first coming in humiliation and his coming in glory that was to follow. The early Christian fathers also held to the same view respecting the period of the world's duration. In the Epistle of Barnabas, we read, in 6,000 years the Lord will bring all things to an end, when iniquity shall be no more, all things being renewed by the Lord. Irenaeus, Bishop of Lyon, A.D. 178, wrote, in as many days as this world was made, in so many thousand years it is perfected. For if the day of the Lord be as it were 1,000 years, and in 6 days those things that are made were finished, it is manifest that the perfecting of those things is in the 6,000 years, when Antichrist, reigning 1,260 days, shall have wasted all things in the world. Then shall the Lord come from heaven in the clouds with the glory of his Father. Hippolytus is said by Photius to have thus reasoned, and so have fixed Antichrist's coming and the world's end about A.D. 500. Cyprian, who was martyred A.D. 258, in his De Exhort says, now 6,000 years are nearly completed. And then he speaks of the world's 7 days of creation and rest as typifying 7 millenniums. And Lactantius, Book of Divine Institutes, AD 310 says, let philosophers know who number thousands of years, ages since the beginning of the world, that the 6,000 years is not yet concluded or ended, but that number being fulfilled, of necessity there must be an end, and the state of human things must be transformed into that which is better. In connection with the time, which was the portion of the prophecy that was sealed, the early church looked to the renewed earth as the residence of the redeemed, drawing their conclusions from the teachings of the Old and New Testaments. Papias, a disciple of St. John, is quoted by Eusebius, who opposed the doctrine as teaching that, after the resurrection of the dead, the kingdom of Christ shall be established on this earth. And the same father is quoted by Jerome, another opposer, as saying that he had the apostles for his authors, and that he considered that what Peter said, what Philip, what Thomas said, and other disciples of the Lord. So even though they opposed him, they acknowledged that they got their teaching from the apostles. That of, Eusebius and Jerome. Polycarp was another of John's disciples, and Irenaeus testifies in an epistle to Florinus that he had seen Polycarp, who related his conversation with John and others who had seen the Lord, and how he related their sayings and the things he had heard of them concerning the Lord, both concerning his miracles and doctrine, as he had received them from the Lord of life, all of which Polycarp related agreeably to the Scriptures. Following such a teacher, Irenaeus taught that at the resurrection of the just, the meek should inherit the earth, and that then would be fulfilled the promise that God made to Abraham. Yes, we are the seed of Abraham, along with the Jews, the Greeks. There is neither Jew nor Greek in Christ, for all are one. We read it plainly, so it will be fulfilled. Justin Martyr, born AD 89. Yes, well, he was 10 years old about the time that John died. But a certain man among us whose name is John, being one of the 12 apostles of Christ, in that revelation which was shown him, prophesied those who believe in our Christ shall fulfill 1,000 years at Jerusalem. And he affirms that all who were accounted orthodox believe so. Justin Martyr was an early Christian apologist and was martyred alongside some of his students. Most of his works are lost, but 2 apologies and a dialogue did survive. The first apology, his most well-known text, passionately defends the morality of the Christian life and provides various ethical and philosophical arguments to convince the Roman Emperor Antoninus to abandon the persecution of the fledgling sect. In Justin Martyr, the chief direct reference to the revelation is on the millennium announced by it, which he interpreted literally, how St. John prophesied that believers in Christ would reign 1,000 years with him at Jerusalem, Jerusalem having been restored, enlarged, and beautified, agreeably with the Old Testament prophecies of the latter day, after which would follow the general resurrection and judgment. And I believe that the general resurrection and judgment, well, the general resurrection precedes the rebuilding of Jerusalem for Messiah, because I don't believe it's built before he comes, but it's built when he comes. And of course, the final judgment is at the end of the millennial reign of Christ, according to the general resurrection and judgment, is at the end, according to chapter 20 of the Revelation. The decline of millennial views. And we got a little more time. Mosheim and all the writers of authority admit that previous to Origen, who introduced the mystical system of interpretation about the middle of the 3rd century, this doctrine had met with no opposition. Origen taught that the scriptures are of little use if we understand them as they are written. Boy, that's a terrible statement. Yeah, the scriptures are of little use if we understand them as they are written. Yeah, because of course they get you to believe that Jesus is going to physically return and physically reign on the earth for 1,000 years, as it is plainly stated by the plain reading of the text in chapter 20. But Origen and those that don't believe that, well, I guess the scriptures are of little use if we understand them as they are written. Dr. Milner says of him, no man, not altogether unsound and hypocritical, ever injured the Church of Christ more than Origen did. From the fanciful mode of allegory introduced by him, uncontrolled by scriptural rule and order, arose a vitiated method of commenting on the scriptures, and it was not till the days of Luther and Melanchthon that this evil was fairly and successfully opposed. Dr. Moschin says of the millennium, now its credit began to decline, principally through the influence and authority of Origen, who opposed it with the greatest warmth because it was incompatible with some of his favorite sentiments. The faith of the church in its earliest and purest age, as writers denominated, that the consummation was then imminent, was never permitted to come to a crisis. A different belief began to prevail before the arrival of their supposed epoch for the end of 6,000 years. And not only so, but the 10 years of Diocletian's bloody persecution, the bloodiest that the church encountered, was followed by the conversion of Constantine to Christianity in AD 312. He undertook to remodel the church in conformity to the government of the state and endowed it with wealth and worldly honors. To profess Christianity, then, no longer subjected one to persecution or reproach, but on the contrary, it became the road to political preferment and wealth. As a consequence, vast numbers of pagans professed conversion to the popular religion and enrolled their names in the church records. And instead of longer looking for the coming kingdom, multitudes actually supposed that the long-predicted kingdom of God was then being established by the increased splendor, popularity, and outward peace of the church. The state of things was such that Eusebius says, it looked like the very image of the kingdom of Christ. And he goes on to argue that then were fulfilled the predictions that had been before applied to the restored earth, or the millennial reign of Christ. And we are running out of time quickly. And looks like I'm just about done. Yeah, we'll get it done here. Gratian III in 378 was the first of the professed Christian emperors to refuse the pontifical robe, the office of sovereign pontiff or pagan high priest, which is instituted by Numa, having been assumed by Augustus and his successors so as to unite in one head the civil and religious powers of the empire. The office being thus vacant, Damasus, the bishop or pope of Rome in AD 378, was declared Pontifex Maximus and made sole judge in religious matters. So you see the actual beginning of the official position of the Pope of Rome as the great father, the holy father of the whole church on the whole earth. Okay? So what follows, of course? Millenarians expelled from the papal church. And we find that to carry out the worship of the Mother of the Gods, it became necessary to expel the Orthodox from the church. Hence we find Rome, Damasus, Basil, and all their friar associates now teaching a merely spiritual heaven of eternal idleness, precisely similar to that of the mysteries of Eleusis, instead of a regenerated universe where men should labor for the glory of their Lord. The Orthodox opposed they declared their hope that the Lord would return and reign. Damasus decided that the reign of the saints had begun already. He now formally declared the millenarians heretics, and that was the beginning of the millenarian heresy, or those who were Chilius or millenarians were now deemed to be heretics and were excommunicated from the church. So he formally declared the millenarians heretical. He expelled them from the church. His courts everywhere decided against them. None were left save those that worshipped the Virgin Queen and desired not that Christ would return in the flesh. Buddhism and the Babylonian worship took the place of Christianity, and the old Chaldean creed became the established religion of the people, as it had for 6 centuries been the secret faith of the aristocracy of Rome. That mystery of iniquity was working the whole time. And this is an article from the London Quarterly Journal of Prophecy, Volume 4, page 332. And my next section in this chapter is on nature and not nurture. But when you'll have to get that when I publish it. And I will, as soon as I get the Audible version done, I'll do it on the air for all my listeners. So you can listen to the book. You don't have to buy anything from me. You can get it free one way or another. But for those people that want to support and like good prophecy books in their library, you'll make sure that you'll add the Millennium Question in September to your catalog of books, to your personal library. Okay. All right. Well, that's what we have for today, and I wish I could get into the chat room on something beside my phone. I'm going to have to learn how to connect. I have my laptop. I know I can connect it like my cell phone to my cell phone. Wireless. There's so many things to learn. But so I'm going to try that just in case this happens to me again, so I can get in the chat room. But that was the last thing I ever expected to happen to my chat room. But anyway, because I know a lot of people there'd be a lot of chats in the chat room right about now, but I just can't deal on my cell phone with that little itty bitty chat room. And it takes more effort than it's worth. Plus I'm sitting there, I'm sweating like a hog, man. My back is wet. I guess you could call me a wet back. I'm a wet back, a honky. Oh, am I getting politically incorrect here? Yeah, maybe. Nah, I guess I could call myself a wetback, huh? Because my shirt is sticking to my back. It's 89 degrees in my studio, and thank God. Yes, thank God that was the tone I was waiting for. Okay, well, it's been fun, everybody. I want to thank everybody for showing up in the chat room, even though I didn't get to chat with you, and showing up for the broadcast. Make sure I'll have these posted later today and tomorrow, and make sure you share them when they show up. Go to my blog, make sure you subscribe, and may the Almighty bless you and keep you as you travel on the narrow way that leads to life. I'll see you next time. Hi, I'm Nicholas Arthur, and I'd like to introduce you to my latest book, Reformed Prophecy Interpretation, an apology for Reformed premillennial historicism in the 21st century. As with primitive biblical Christianity, historicism is the method of prophecy interpretation restored with the advent of the Protestant Reformation, and had become so widely held that for a long time it was called the Protestant view. My book is not so much about the errors of dispensationalism or amillennialism. Rather, it is about the historicist alternative to understanding many of the same passages from the vantage point of prophecy fulfilled in history. For those that desire more than mere hypotheses, bolstered with conjectured speculation, those who require explicit biblical exegesis and verified historical fulfillment, and are not willing to accept speculation as anything other than what it is. Speculation, not truth. This book is for you. Over the last century, this method of interpretation has become almost completely forgotten, even by Protestants, in the face of a method that is based almost entirely on future speculation, rather than fulfilled prophecy in history. In my book, I examine the reasons for this and investigate some of the prophecy which has been fulfilled in the interim, as well as present an apology for Reformed pre-millennial historicism to the 21st century. If you're interested in a copy of my book, you can go to my website, crosstheborder.org, and get more information there. Or you may also find it at Amazon.